Hey everyone, how's it going today, and welcome back to another update, or rather actually in today's video is I really just want to take maybe a little bit of a change of pace to essentially talk a little bit about the other side of unemployment. So essentially maybe much more about how to actually find employment. So if you are someone that's currently either unemployed and you're looking for work, especially if maybe it's been very difficult for that reason, or maybe you happen to be employed but you're maybe contemplating about trying to just upgrade your job or maybe find an even better job one day, then I do believe that this video will hopefully be very insightful. The big thing to notice is that I do notice is that most people are probably here for typical unemployment news and updates, so maybe this will be a little bit less popular, but I do however believe that this will hopefully be particularly insightful, and certainly at the very least maybe something just new and fresh to really be able to talk about. So we're to get right to it, but as always, maybe real fast before we begin, consider smashing the like button if you guys enjoy videos like this. Consider subscribing and hitting the bell for just videos similar to this. And as always, maybe feel free to comment any questions, personal thoughts, maybe because we are now talking about the professional side of things, maybe if you are currently unemployed, and or maybe also the kind of job that you're specifically looking for, because there's going to be a little bit of variation, or even just a simple hello, because I think it's always great to have, to try to just get a conversation going, especially since we are talking about something new that may not necessarily be the most popular, but hopefully can just consider this as a little bit of like a gift video to hopefully help out. So with that being said, let's get this video started. So the number one advice that I think I really just have to really be able to share if you are someone that is currently looking for employment, maybe in just one very straight word, is pretty much going to be networking. And I think that this is one of those things that most people know about this advice, but very few people actually will physically act on that advice. And I think even fewer people will actually know how to actually do it correctly. And I think that's the really big part that maybe is even a little bit of a secret out there to put out there. What I will say is what I think is that you should not necessarily try to do is basically the conventional method that I see a lot of people doing, which is essentially to try to just take their resume and spam it to basically every single job posting and listing blindly on Indeed or Monster.com over and over again. Because the big reason why is because you may actually end up very lucky, and maybe you do actually end up finding your job. But I do think is that when you decide to send out all sorts of like hundreds of applications all around, it also may not necessarily be the most efficient way to do it. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to jobs, the most important thing I think is that while it is very nice to have options, I think it's even more important to try to focus on quality, because we only have so many hours during a day, and it's a little bit like relationships. You may have many different options, but I think the most important thing is really to just have a few. And I say a few because we are a finance channel, so I always preach about how it's important to try to have more than one source of income. But at this time, for the sake of just looking for one job, I think that should be the number one focus. Now, in terms of how to actually physically do the networking, I would say is that there are several methods that you can do. The first one I think would be a huge recommendation is to just try to keep in touch, or to reach out and try to contact actual employers. Because I think the big thing to really notice is that in many companies, especially very big companies, there's a reason why the HR and hiring team exist, and the huge reason is because they actually want to find candidates. So in a lot of ways, I believe is that if you are someone that's able to maybe directly reach out to them, whether this has to do with sending an email or maybe just messaging them, LinkedIn is a very great resource. Highly recommend trying to get onto LinkedIn. It's essentially a professional networking website where you can just upload your resume, but it's also a very great way to essentially try to meet people, to really stay in touch with them. And I think that when you're able to directly contact the employer, I think you can also develop a much more closer relationship with a lot of the hiring team. And I believe that's through that, it also means that they are much more likely to trust you. I think that's a very big thing. And it makes a lot of sense, because I think sometimes, if you look at it from the perspective of a hiring team, they may end up getting just thousands of who knows, applications, especially if it's a very big company, but it can be very, very difficult to try to filter out. But if they're able to receive a much more personalized contact from you, then I think that it also makes it a lot easier, because then they can at least know is that you're a little bit, or certainly much more, approachable. And I think that's the very big thing compared to just blind applications that are basically just sent into just the pool of who knows how many people are over there. And then the next advice that I highly recommend when it comes to just networking is probably just to try to spend time, and this one's a little bit more strategic and it depends on the industry, but essentially to just try to spend time in the location that you think the people that are in the industry that you're trying to get into are probably going to spend the most amount of time in. So this obviously has a lot of variation depending on your job, but a couple examples, for instance, like if let's say you're looking for a job in healthcare, you can potentially try to ask your doctor or ask your friends if you have a friend that works in healthcare, or just ask a clinic of some kind. If let's say, for example, you happen to be trying to pursue a career as a teacher, you can maybe visit a school, you can maybe go to education-based events. Many industries have their own professional organizations that sometimes hold events. I do know, for example, I work in the events industry, interestingly enough. So in that example, that's actually an even more perfect example, because a lot of the people that work in the events industry actually are at the events that we enjoy going to. And I think that's a really great way to kind of learn about the different opportunities that exist out there. And probably the last advice that I really have when it comes to the world of networking is probably, and this one's going to be a little bit, maybe a little bit funny, but it's just simply put is just to live your life. But this is even more particularly true if you are someone that either has a relatively much more outgoing life, or maybe if you don't necessarily have the most outgoing life, to maybe just challenge yourself to try to go out a little bit more. I think it's especially needed both for physical and for mental health, and hopefully also for change of pace, especially after the difficulties of most of last year with the pandemic and every single person just basically shut behind closed doors. It was a very difficult time, and I think that maybe this is time to maybe just step out a little bit, to explore a little bit, to go out. And I think the big idea really behind this is that especially if you are someone that lives in a particularly large city of some kind, the real reality, I believe, is that you technically can actually meet people almost anywhere. And it's actually a very, very small world, because I think a lot of times people tend to just, even in a big city, for example, I'm in New York where we have 8 million people. People typically tend to kind of just gather around in their own community based off of what they're interested in. So a lot of times, for example, I'm in the film industry. It is very, very, very common to try to just meet someone who's also in the film industry, exchange contacts, and even though you're meeting for the first time, end up realizing you maybe have a whole collection of mutual friends on social media. So it's a very, very small world out there, and I think the big reason why it's a very huge recommendation is that when you're able to meet a lot of people, I think first off is that it can actually be a very fun experience. I think that's just, I think a lot of times in life, there's also a lot more than just working all day. So I think it can be a hopefully relatively enjoyable experience. But I think another big reason is that by just meeting and talking to people outside, you're also able to learn a lot more about what they physically do. And in return, also learn a lot more about the opportunities that are actually physically out there that you maybe would have never even heard of before. For example, again, going back is that I work in the events industry, and this is a little bit more of a personal note, but at that time period, I got into this industry largely because I actually really enjoy going to events. So I never would have imagined that you can actually make an actual living, especially on a part-time basis, just by basically getting paid to go out to basically talk to a whole bunch of people and, see really, really cool things and travel. But the idea behind it, I think, is that at the very end of the day, when you're able to meet people, because every single person knows something, or certainly knows someone one that you maybe not necessarily know, at the end of the day, I believe that the biggest motivation to doing this is that first off, you can potentially learn something. So there is an educational incentive to it. And maybe you end up, learning or meeting someone that's in your profession, and you maybe end up learning that maybe it's not necessarily the profession for you. So there's a lot of education to it. I think that it'll be really, really great for just social skills, in general, which is a very, very huge skill set that I think many, many employers look for. And I think that for people that enjoy it, it can also be a very, very fun experience. And I think most of all, at the end of the day, where it comes back to what this video is about is that there is a potential, if you do this, maybe it can potentially now lead to finding employment and finding an actual physical job. And even more specifically, one that hopefully is actually a quality job that you can maybe hopefully actually look forward to. So it's not just like you're settling for whatever's out there, but something that is actually very, very particularly meaningful and enjoyable. And again, a huge part of life really is just a time and place situation. And I think just putting yourself out there, that's probably the biggest and probably the most life-changing thing that I think a lot of people can really potentially do. But really beyond this is that that's what I really just wanted to share in today's update. So a little bit of a change of pace. If you guys enjoyed that, maybe consider smashing the like button. If you guys haven't done so, subscribing, hitting the bell. Maybe feel free to comment. Honestly, just really anything, even a simple hello. Maybe share this if this is something that you found relatively insightful. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys made it all the way through, especially because again, this is a more of a unique change of pace. And with that being said, hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys for watching.